All right, everyone, welcome, and thank you so much for coming today to discuss the promise and the peril of social media in a post-truth era. We have a fantastic set of panelists, and we've set up this session to have lots of different opportunities for interaction, both online and in person. My name is Emily Hodge. I'm an assistant professor at Montclair State University in New Jersey, and I organized the session together with the rest of the Social Media Committee of Division L, which is the division of AERA that focuses on education policy and politics. So we will be live tweeting today using the hashtags AERA19 as well as hashtag post-truth. So post-truth is what you see on the right side of the screen up here. That is what's called a Twitter back channel. So when you ask a question and you include the hashtag post-truth, it will show up here as we're talking today. Similar, if you include the hashtag AERA19, it goes to a page with all of the tweets that use that hashtag so that everyone at AERA can see what we are talking about in the session today. So we have 4 fantastic panelists, each of whom offers a distinct view on the potential of social media to build a stronger democracy, or the danger of social media to sometimes break it down. The organization of events today is that each panelist will speak for about 5 minutes, and then during that time, comments and questions should be tweeted using this post-truth hashtag, and then our panelists will have an opportunity to engage with your questions. We also have built in 2 opportunities for small group interaction and conversation so that we have a chance to talk through some of these issues together. So we're going to have the first small group conversation after our first 2 panelists, and then the second one after the last 2 panelists. But so before we begin, I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate via the Twitter back channel. So raise your hand if you're on Twitter now and you're planning to tweet during the session. Keep your hand up, please. All right, if you do not have your, okay, keep your hand up a little longer, because if you are not on Twitter or you're new and you want help, take a look around, and we're gonna pause for a second so you can move, okay, and move and make sure you're sitting next to somebody who can help you ask questions. All right, so we're gonna pause for 30 seconds. Our first panelist is gonna get set up, okay, and again, let us know, ask around, make sure you're sitting next to somebody who can make sure that you can participate in this way. All right, thanks for coming. Is everybody okay? Nobody moved. All right.
You tell me when to start.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Good afternoon, morning. Good morning, everybody. We're going to start out with the perils, I think, and then we'll move to the promise. So we'll get the perils out of the way. So I'm John Sapovitz from the University of Pennsylvania. I did a study that came out in 2017 called hashtag Common Core, and it was an analysis of... Oh, okay, great. The mouse has to... Will the mouse clicking move it? Okay. So we looked at over 1 million tweets over 24 months on Twitter at 190,000 actors who were tweeting about the Common Core, and they were using various hashtags to tweet about the Common Core. And really, the story that I'm going to tell you is one part of a larger story. Whoop, that doesn't do it. Let me do this. Okay. So we told a story that had 5 pieces, but I'm just going to focus on one, which is the central actors here. And so this is a picture of one of our social networks of the communicators around the Common Core. This is a structural network. We didn't, move the nodes or change anything. But this is basically the communication patterns and the way that people connect to each other behaviorally, how they choose to tweet and retweet and follow each other. So this is just a picture of a network, but when we looked at this network, we saw patterns that connected people together. So the first thing that was kind of funny is that this group out in red, who's not connected at all to the rest of the network, it turned out that in Costa Rica, the Social Security Administration is called the Caja Costarricense Seguridad Social, CCSS. So they were using the hashtag CCSS, and at the time that we were tracking hashtag CCSS, so they show up in our network, although they weren't talking about the Common Core. But there were 3 groups that were talking about the Common Core, and when we looked at the content of their tweets, we saw that there were supporters of the Common Core who were mostly homophilic, who were connected more tightly together than to others. There were educators who opposed the Common Core, and then there were outsiders who were tweeting about the Common Core, and mostly to oppose it, but they weren't educators. They were trying to hijack this issue for larger political purposes. So as we dug in, this is sort of the 4 networks over time, and we did 4 6-month segments. And as we dug in, we started to see that this conversation about the Common Core was being essentially taken over by the opponents of the Common Core from outside of education. And that looks kind of like this. These are percentages of folks from those sub-communities. And you can see it kind of like Pac-Man. The yellow group is gobbling up the conversation around the Common Core. When we looked even deeper into the opponents of the Common Core from outside of education, we noticed something even more interesting. There was this group called the Patriot Journalists Network, PJNet. And they would often, but not always, it's hard to surmise, use hashtag PJNet in their tweets. And they had a set of techniques that they used, and we identified 2. One was called botnets, and the other was hashtag rallies. And what they would do is they would bring folks together, hashtag rallies, they would bring folks together, and they would have a prefabricated set of tweets, and folks would show up at a particular time for a couple of hours for a hashtag rally, use their pre-designed tweets, and essentially increase the volume of content about a particular subcomponent of whatever issue they were focused on. You'll see in a timeline, I'll show you in a second, how this showed up in changes in volume. Another strategy that they used was something that we call botnets. And a botnet was a technique that they used where a follower could essentially turn their Twitter account over to PJNet, and PJNet could synchronously send out a whole bunch of tweets from seemingly separate accounts that were reinforcing the same message. So if you didn't look carefully, it would look like all these people were spontaneously tweeting and retweeting these messages about a particular issue, but they were really one force behind that group. So these were strategies that PJNet used. I should say that PJNet was a grassroots Christian conservative group that was run out of a church in Tallahassee, Florida. We interviewed the guy who ran it. And the Common Core was just one of multiple issues that they were involved in. So they were trying to use social media to influence a variety of issues, and the Common Core was just one of the multiple issues that they were focused on. Second Amendment rights, pro-life movement, Blue Lives Matter, those kind of things. Almost done. So this is activity of PJNet, or this is just activity in the Common Core over the 4 6-month periods that we looked at. And you can see here that PJNet caused a lot of these spikes in activity. So when we start to look, we start to see how their hashtags, how particular opposition to Common Core in certain places was being driven by their activity. And another way of looking at that, the yellow line here shows overall activity on the Common Core, and what I'll show you now is activity driven by PJNet. So over time, early on, they were not influential at all. Over time, they were increasingly co-opting and taking over the conversation. So this got a lot of play, needless to say, in newspapers. And this was kind of the thing that journalists picked up. And it turned out that this was kind of like shining light in the darkness of Twitter a little bit, because about 8 months after our study came out, PJNet got shut down by Twitter. And at least journalists attributed that in part to the work that we had done. Of course, that's not the end of the story, right? Because like whack-a-mole, little PJNetlets have shown up across the country in states trying to influence state policy, even around education issues. And this may be a byproduct of ESSA, right? So the moving down to state. So this stuff is not gone. It was just shifted. But some important things about this story, just some takeaways, and then I'll finish up. Some takeaways are, number one is that we can't turn the clock back. Social media is changing the politics of education that produces educational policy. And so we have to be aware of that and diligent and vigilant about that. A second takeaway is that, as this story shows, this all happened before the 2016 election. So our data went right up into the primaries, and Trump even tweeted a little bit in our data set, and we can see some spikes associated with Trump. But this notion that education is not immune. So all of this activity is going on in our little corner of the conversation about public issues in public spaces. And then the third thing is that I would say is that that things like social network analysis, and we use psychological analysis, those can reveal a lot of the hidden things that are going on and really kind of make visible a lot of the invisible things that are happening. So I'll pass this on now that we got the perils out of the way. We can talk about promise.
Well, and so actually, your next job is to stay here and answer some questions.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
You're still on the spot.
Can I have a little water?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, questions. Am I looking at Twitter for questions?
Yes, we're looking at.
Oh my God!
Oh, wait, see,
I'm just like responding to this guy. Yeah, give me the picture.
All right, so we have our hashtag over here on the right with some both observations and questions that have come up, as well as this hilarious gif of Andy from Parks and Rec. I know I saw a question. Oh, all right, question from Molly Sanders. Molly, where are you? All right, so Molly asks, how did you determine whether tweeters were educators or outside of education?
So there were a lot of, so one of the big within education movements, if you know kind of the social movement around education, is a teacher group called Badass Teachers. I don't know if anybody has heard of the Badass Teachers, but Badass Teachers are an affiliation of teachers who viewed the Common Core as something that was taking away the professionalism of teaching. So what we did to identify who were within education is basically we used two things. One is we looked at a random sample of accounts and identified that folks were affiliated as educators in some shape or form. And then we used, in the larger social network, we used, there were sub-community routines that separated folks by who you affiliated with. So, good question. Other questions?
Yeah, well, it looks like on the back channel right now, a lot of people are using it to make comments rather than ask questions, which is also a totally valid use. We have some kind of takeaway points about how social media is influencing policy making, and social network analyses can review hidden structures and incidents. There's a great comment from Bodong Shen. Where are you in the audience? Yeah, thank you for that.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, any other kind of comments on how social media might influence policy making?
Well, so what's interesting is that when we survey current policymakers, they're not exactly social media literate, but I think that, that generations are changing, and so folks are increasingly seeing the power and influence of social media. And I have to say that all of this stuff that we did was before Trump was using Twitter as a soapbox. And there was a lot of question about, is Twitter just an echo chamber, right? Is it happening totally divorced from reality, and reality is over here, and that whatever happens here doesn't really matter? I don't think we ask those questions anymore. So, I think that one of the powerful things that this story tells is it was happening pretty much right under our noses without anybody being aware. And it was also coincident with the increasing partisanship of the Common Core and all the state movements to move away from calling things the Common Core and using their, like the New Jersey state standards, which were essentially the Common Core state standards.
All right, we have a lot of great questions. Thank you so much for participating via this Twitter back channel. Let's see. We have a question from Meg Blanchard. Where are you, Meg? And so what can we do on Twitter, or what can we get our students to do to have a positive impact on social media? I think it's going to be a great question for a small group conversation especially. All right, here's one, Teru Clavel. Thank you for asking this question. What do you say to all those parents who jump on the I hate the Common Core 2 bandwagon?
Well, so first off, it wasn't my job in this study to take a position on the Common Core, right? I'm trying to reveal how the conversation was being influenced by folks who are using social media as a way to try and influence others or to elevate their view above others. So we used, if you go to the website, there's a lot of psychological analyses where folks have really used a lot of the tools that have been around for time immemorial, right? So this story is really as old as Madison's argument about how we have to make sure that we balance factions against each other, right? We're just bringing it into a new realm. And so we have to see that these are old struggles playing out on new platforms and in new media.
All right, and just one final question, kind of a combination of two. So is what we're doing now, could this be considered a hashtag rally? What are the components? And that was from Talia, and another question from Paul. Should educators be thinking of these tactics as a way to influence policy?
So to answer the first question, no, this is not a hashtag rally, because a hashtag rally would be where we have a united message that we're trying to get out and to raise the profile of. So if we all tweeted the same tweets and we got that to spike activity around an issue, that would be a hashtag rally, okay? The second question was?
Well, even if it's not a hashtag rally, but should educators be using something similar? Should we be using hashtag rallies to communicate our points of view?
So, this is a particular effort to influence people's views and ideas, and I think that that's what educators are trying to do. We're trying to create influence. So I don't view necessarily the effort of this group as negative or positive, but I do think that school leaders who are trying to use Twitter to communicate with their constituencies, they're trying to influence their constituencies. They're trying to share stuff about what's going on that they think are positive. So I think that the medium is kind of neutral, and it's the people who are using it as a force for positive change or a force for negative change.
All right, well, thank you so much for your questions. Thank you to John for being on the spot. We really appreciate your comments. All right, next we're going to hear from Sonia Horsford about her role in creating the Black Education Research Collective.
All right, good morning, everyone. So how many of you are new to Twitter or maybe at the novice level? Okay, I'm your representative on the panel. I'm somewhat, so I'm an associate professor of education leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, and I have two Twitter accounts that I manage. One is under my name, and I even struggle with its use in terms of how I present myself, right? My personal interests, my professional identity. And so that's one thing that I continue to kind of wrestle with in terms of what I tweet out, what I retweet, et cetera. And then the other account, which is the one that I'll focus on today, is the Black Education Research Collective. And this project is just something that I launched at the university through our Institute for Urban and Minority Education. And my research focus is really around Black education, school desegregation, critical race theory, and urban school leadership. And oftentimes, the work around Black education, can often be marginalized, or that there are scholars that are doing this work and students who are interested in the work, but we're oftentimes kind of dispersed, across institutions in different places or different units and programs throughout the institution. And so this had been a vision of mine since I was a doctoral student, and finding a way to help connect individuals who have this shared research interest and agenda. And so the collective is something that we started. We have meetings, convenings, do some mentoring, and just bring people together in a very organic way. Nothing terribly formalized at this point. But I thought, hey, Twitter might be a great vehicle to kind of connect people not only in the physical space, but in the virtual space. And so I just created an account. I couldn't even remember the password to it, so I had to pull it up on the phone. Just created this account and began to follow individuals, who were educators that seemed to have similar interests, research faculty that I knew that were also studying Black education. And over the course of several months, we have about 83 followers now. And it's just been an interesting way for me to experience how this tool could be used, in more promising ways, not perilous yet, to connect individuals with shared interests. The purpose of BERC is to represent a collective of scholars focused on research at the intersection of Black history, culture, politics, and education. And so we have everyone from practitioners and research faculty, and hopefully in the future policymakers who also will be a part of any dialogues or conversations that we could have on Twitter. That's about the extent of it to this point. I am a bit terrified about the perils that Jonathan shared in terms of recognizing that there's so much we don't know about these platforms, and that there are so many people who are so much more sophisticated and strategic in delivering those messages. And so the collective is really, again, an organic way to hopefully leverage the positive aspects of building community through social media, and who knows, maybe even using that. It's funny because we actually had a thread that was generated that ended up suggesting a conference at one point around a particular set of issues around choice and neoliberalism in education and its impact on Black education, families, and communities. So I see great possibility in that, in, again, being able to connect scholars and engage in conversations, even this notion of the hashtag rally, as being a possibility of really being able to focus on an issue or a policy agenda and using that as a way to bring people together to advance it. And so that's my story, and I'm happy to answer any questions or even invite suggestions on how we can make this an even more robust opportunity for individuals.
You are followed by the Badass Teachers Association.
Well, there it is. We've made it. The bats.
Yeah, so take a second to generate your questions. We have one here from Paul. Where are you, Paul? Thank you for your being a great tweeter. So it was a question for Sonia about, I wonder whether Twitter is self-selective. Are we missing researchers, I guess either just in general or from across the social media ecology?
Thank you, Paul. I think that's a great question. I think it's a parallel. Maybe it's two different sets of communities, because BERC is, we really started as this physical network of individuals at Teachers College, and some senior scholars from other places. This was more secondary in terms of our outreach. So I do think in the Twitter space it's self-selective. A lot of researchers just don't use Twitter. But it I think provides an interesting opportunity for intergenerational connections and conversations. And so thinking about, I'm Generation X, so I'm kind of in this interesting space where I feel like I'm oftentimes liaising and translating between, millennials and some of the older generations who may not feel as comfortable with social media. And so that's part of why I've entered this space as well, in terms of being able to speak a language that I think can help bring individuals together across generation, across interest, and across space.
Also a question here that deals more with the peril than the promise, but Lizette, where are you? Lizette asked a question about how women of color receive the most trolling on Twitter. How can we strategize to protect them?
That's probably beyond my pay grade, but I think it's, again, one of those those issues that we have to be sensitive to. You know, I even kind of anticipate sometimes some of the fights, you know, that can begin to emerge when people have very strong opinions, and, you know, it's very limited when we have, how many characters do we have? 280, you know, which I think can make that challenging, but I think that's certainly a concern and something that we need to think about, but I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, we also had another question from Paul about how you navigate your personal posts, and if you could speak a little more about how you have figured out what to post where.
Very unintentionally at this point. You know, it's interesting too because my personal life, I mean, I'm a mother, right? I have 3 children, I have a spouse who is very active on Twitter, who is in politics, and so just it's interesting to see that kind of play out in a virtual space as well. I mean, it's something that I've always contended with kind of in our own professional lives, but that may be being amplified in a particular way. And social media has honestly been something that's been challenging for me. I have very strong views, as does he, and so how that even is interpreted by others can be challenging. And so I change my profile pic constantly. I often change my bio. Sometimes, you know, like right now it has mother, author, and education professor. Sometimes it'll be partner to, you know, my spouse, and I'm constantly kind of negotiating depending on my mood and what I want to retweet or express on my Twitter feed. I think that constantly changes. So I think that's also something that I would like for us as researchers to talk more about, particularly professors and faculty. You know, to what extent are we representing our institutions and our programs? To what extent are we representing ourselves? I know that people often include a disclaimer, you know, saying that these are personal tweets, but still at the end of the day, it's very difficult sometimes for us to disentangle our personal opinions from, you know, the units, the programs, and the institutions that we represent.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Sonia for sharing your personal and professional experiences on Twitter. We are going to take a pause now for our first small group conversation. So we're going to take about 10 minutes for you to pair up with about 3 or 4 people sitting around you and just talk about what you've heard so far. What are your reactions? What perils of social media have you personally experienced, if any? Engage with a question about how to make Twitter a safer and less trolly space. Or even think about how we might mitigate some of those perils and amplify the promises. I have to say, I've never felt more on task to be on my phone during an AERA presentation, which feels a little weird. So we'll come back together in 10 minutes and just enjoy the opportunity to interact with each other, introduce yourselves, and engage with these questions or others that strike you. All right, wonderful. I'm glad that you had the opportunity to hopefully make a new friend at AERA, to chat together in a small group. Before we turn it over to our next 2 panelists, there are more questions that have come up on the Twitter back channel that I thought it might be nice to give our panelists an opportunity to engage with. For example, question from Jack Doherty there in the blue. Oh, yes, from this wonderful group back here. So should we discourage our students, colleagues, or campuses from posting on social media platforms that promote discrimination? Example, Facebook. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on, you know, kind of different platforms and kind of the ethics of social media engagement.
I will move the mic up here. Yeah, so I haven't really given this a lot of thought, to be honest with you. I think that's part of one of the biggest problems of any of these platforms, right? Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, is that it can be a playground, right, for lots of unethical behavior. So for me, you know, obviously, like, I think about doing what is ethical when I post something, when I engage with something, but I think if I'm working with students, you know, be it undergrad or graduate students, thinking about what is your role, what do you communicate, and trying to help them think through what they do when they run up against those kinds of interactions. even if it's a personal, right, a personal attack against them or something that sort of makes their way into a conversation. I don't know if I would abandon the platform completely, because I think if we, you know, I think we have an opportunity to transform it into being something that works really well for other people, but there's always going to be these issues that pop up that we're going to have to contend with. So I don't know. Do you want to? I'm sorry?
One thing that people might be interested in, we just funded a.
Do you want the microphone?
I think, can you guys hear me without it? Oh, okay. I'm always thinking about what empirically we might be able to, you know, draw from to answer these questions. And just one thought that I have is we just gave a small grant to University of Virginia Associate Professor Noel Hurd, who has been looking at the sort of hate messages on social media, various platforms of social media, and thinking about how to get white students, an intervention with white students to get them to intervene on those platforms with their fellow white students. And I thought it was kind of an interesting approach to thinking about how to intervene on some of these general platforms, and then how that can be, you know, white students can help other white students.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and that gets to another question from the audience about how people can think about engaging with Twitter safely. So a question about how scholars at various career stages might navigate the social media space differently. And there was another question about trolling on Twitter and what to do when you experience that, or, you know, if it's you know, maybe if you're from a certain demographic category, you actually stay away from Twitter because it feels risky to you, and then but then your work is not as visible. Questions? Any thoughts from our panelists about how to protect yourself?
All right, I will pick this one up again. So I think, you know, in a moment when I share what I do on Twitter, it's what I do doesn't really has not lended itself to people trolling me or to people trolling each other in the kinds of conversations that might emerge from what I share and promote on Twitter. But what was the question again? Sorry.
Well, it's just, I didn't do a good job of asking a good question. The question was, number one, how can people engage on Twitter differently at different career phases?
Okay.
But I think it's more just in general, if you're from a group that historically receives more discrimination, social media can be an unsafe space for you.
Yeah.
But then you lose out on the opportunity to convey your ideas in that broader format.
Yeah,
So
I mean, because there are
how do you decide what to do?
there are very serious things that happen to people, particularly on Twitter, you know, where people find out about their families, or they find out where they live, they find out where they work, and they make threats against them. And, you know, I think if you feel like you're at risk for that sort of thing, or you're scared that that's going to happen to you, or it's already happened to you, then I think it's important to sort of take a step back and think how you want to represent. If you want to be on there at all, I think there's valid reasons for saying I don't want to be on there at all, because it's I've never experienced it, but I've experienced other things like that outside of social media, and it's a huge emotional and psychological drain on you, and it can really wreck your life. So if you want to be on there because you want to share and you want to interact, then it's really, I think, and I don't have experience with this, so if you do, then I would encourage you to add to the Twitter feed on this. I would think about having a more anonymous kind of an account, or even a private account where you have to approve who follows you and who can, you know, see what you're tweeting and see, you know, and interact with you. Those are some safeguards that are there. Like, I might not put my name up there, I might not put my picture up there, but I might put something that's sort of representative of the work that I'm doing that I want to share, but make it a little more anonymous and more private. But it's extremely serious.
Yeah, John.
So I think that social media is an element of a bigger phenomenon that's happening in our profession, which is that researchers are not limited to just the production process, right? Part of our role is expanding to using our production to have influence in the fields that we want to have influence. And social media is one mechanism to do that. And this is becoming increasingly part of the foundation expectation for folks in our field. And so I think that we're all grappling with what does that look like, not only from the researcher perspective, but from the perspective of our, the folks who are judging our quality to give us promotion and tenure and all that kinds of stuff, right? So my students come up to me and they think that the number of Twitter followers they have is a factor in their getting academic jobs and getting tenure, and I say no, that has nothing to do with it as far as I can tell. But I think that that's an indicator that these worlds are blending and that we're grappling with things and that these are the issues that we're grappling with as media is really decomposing into who has the authority to share knowledge. It used to be the official media, right? The New York Times and stuff. But now we're all New York Timeses and we all have some authority to share media. And the world in which those are being critiqued and pushed back against are breaking down and much more fluid and dynamic.
Thank you. All right, well, so now we're going to switch gears and hear from our last two panelists. Next, we'll hear from Vivian Zhang from the WT Grant Foundation, more about the role of foundations on social media and thinking about the use of research evidence.
Okay, so I'm going to talk from two perspectives. One is as a foundation who has an initiative on studying the use of research evidence in policy and practice. So we actually turn this, like, how does research get used, into an area of scientific inquiry. So we're actually funding people to study the use of research evidence in policy and practice. And so part of what I'll talk to you about are some of the things that people who study this stuff are learning about the role of social media and Twitter in particular in terms of use of research evidence. And then I'll also speak just a little bit from my own experience of using Twitter as a medium for promoting this initiative and the things that we're funding out of this initiative. I want to say, if Sonia feels like she's just a beginner, I'm a super, super beginner. I'm still at the very much, I consider myself a neophyte when it comes to the use of Twitter. So for those of you out there who are just getting started, I hope you'll feel encouraged to jump in, even if you don't know all the vocabulary and the ways to think about this work. So what I wanted to share with you is a way of thinking about social media that I've gotten from two communication scholars that we have funded, Matthew Weber and Itzhak Yanovitsky. They have been thinking about the using social media as a lot like brokering knowledge in general. So if you think about that as a framework for what it means to use Twitter. And like good communication scholars, they think a lot about, it depends on how you do it, how you engage in this stuff, depends on what your intended impacts are, right? So what is it that your goals are? And then on which audiences. So you see here intended impacts on intended audiences. And in their knowledge brokerage framework, they talk about different kinds of goals that you might have for something like tweeting, but you can think about it for other forms of communication too. You might just be trying to build awareness. You just want people to know what's going on. You might be trying to make information more accessible and readily available. Your goal might be more around engagement, which is more that you want people to care, not just to know, but to care about something. Your goal might be linkage. Maybe you want to link different groups of people around some common ideas. Or maybe your goal is mobilization, which is really trying to move people past information, past caring, but towards some kind of action together. And then I think for folks in this room, we could think about different audiences that we might be interested in. They might be researchers like you, right? I think in some ways it's a great way you can build community of people who are like you or doing work in your area. You might want to be connecting with researchers who are not like you, right? You might be wanting to connect with policymakers who are working on a specific issue or issue area that you care about, or similarly, a group of practitioners working on an issue area that you care about. I think all of this can be really important, not in this study, but in other study we've funded by Chris Lubianski, Janelle Scott, and Liz DeBray. They have found an echo chamber effect, both through social media, but also offline in terms of what gets cited. So they've studied policies like school vouchers and charter schools, and they find that if you find the pro camp and the anti camp, the pro camp tends to cite a certain body of research. The anti-camp cites their own body of research. There is very little research that both camps cite. So what you have is then an echo chamber of people who cite and reinforce different bodies of work, and there's not much interconnection between them. And then when they look at the same or similar processes on social media, they find similarly that when people are tweeting, they're often tagging or tweeting to people who are already within their coalition, who are already pro or anti. So there's a reification of this echo chamber offline and online. That's what it seems like. So then thinking about what the goals are, I think, of tweeting and what you're trying to do. Are you trying to link different communities, or are you trying to build a stronger knowledge or will within a community? For us, and this is where I think about my own use of Twitter, one of the things I started a Twitter account to do was just to promote more knowledge and awareness. Really, I was just focused on awareness about this work we were supporting on the use of research evidence in policy and practice. It's kind of a new-ish field that we've been trying to revive. It kind of went dormant in since the 70s and 80s, and so we've been trying to revitalize it. So a lot of it was just like, I just wanted awareness out there. And so I was tweeting a lot about the US researchers we were funding working on use of research evidence. As I learned more about the international scholars that were working on this issue, it was a lot around linkage and trying to link the international scholars working on this issue with the US researchers working on this issue. So doing a lot of tweeting out things that were happening from the London School of Economics impact blog, for example, and tagging researchers here in the US who I thought would be interested. So trying to bridge some of these communities. And then as we started thinking more about the policymakers who are working on evidence-based policy or evidence-informed practice, thinking about how to bring them into sort of this larger community of understanding the work of the scholars who are studying the use of evidence. What can those people who are putting in place policies and practices to draw on evidence learn from those folks? And so doing a lot of that, again, linkage to try to link those two, those different communities. We've also been very supportive of research practice partnerships as a really promising strategy for bringing researchers and practitioners together. So using Twitter similarly around a lot around linkage, just trying to link different communities. Increasingly, for example, there's a group of environmental science researchers and policymakers that are also very interested in things that are like partnerships, so trying to link them with the folks in education doing partnerships, so a lot of this linkage work. We haven't done as much around mobilization, but I think that's something that's probably the next frontier, is figuring out how to kind of harness this sort of shared understanding, and as we could become more and more of an online community, or a community that has an online presence, to mobilize them towards some shared action. So, for example, some of you might have seen we've been trying to get people to sign on to a set of principles on democratizing evidence in education. So that's at least kind of starting to move people towards some unified action. So let me pause there.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Vivian, and thank you all for your questions while she was speaking. We got a question from Jonathan Bartels. Where are you, Jonathan? Yeah, no, I think this is a great observation. So the echo chamber isn't unique to social media. We can often see the same thing in research. Who cites whom or what idea, and what are you citing? Yeah, so thanks for that observation. Any thoughts, Vivian, on just the kind of echo chamber effect of research use?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that's such an important point to make, that is this just another mechanism by which we are reproducing some of the similar dynamics that occur offline? But so I think that's an important point. It's useful from our perspective to study these things so you can actually see them, and then hopefully think about how to intervene on them. It is troubling for me as someone who works in an organization that supports research, that research can be a way of trying to build stronger understandings and consensus, or at least negotiation around a common set of ideas. That becomes harder to do when there's this sort of polarization, whether it's within the scientific community or within certain political communities. So if, in my own behavior, when I learn about Chris Lubianski's work, is what I try to do is make sure that I'm not only tweeting and only following people who think like I do, and try to at least have a more diverse set of people that I follow and that I tweet at. And that's just my attempt to try to keep myself honest in some of these ways.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight this very pointed response from Kate and the audience about how, even right now, or on the AERA 19 website, some of these kinds of echo chambers could be happening, and for us all to think about who we are tweeting and retweeting today and being attentive to that.
Yeah.
So thanks for that observation. Okay, so just in the interest of time, let's move to our last panelist, Lee Hall, who is not only a full professor at the University of Wyoming, but also has an amazing site called Teaching Academia.
And then do I just navigate this with the?
Yes, I think it should work.
Okay, we'll find out if it works. All right, hi everybody. So I want to start off, before I get into social media and what I see as the promises and how I use it, I want to tell you a little bit about me, because my backstory actually feeds into why I do what I do. So I am a first-generation college student who got incredibly lucky. All right, somehow I ended up with a PhD. I'm not sure how that happened. I'm not sure how I navigated all that. I'm not sure how I figured it out. I know a little bit at the end how I figured it out, because I had a really great mentor. But up until that point, I didn't even know that getting a PhD, being a college professor, was a job that was available to me that I could have, and how you even got that in the first place. So like I said, first generation, very lucky, started off in community college with very supportive parents who knew that it was important for me to go to college, said, you need to go, you need to do this, that's all we know, good luck, right? And it was sort of up to me to navigate it and to make my way through. And as I progressed, right, from bachelor's to master's to eventually PhD, I ended up with a very incredible mentor. So my academic advisor when I was getting my PhD is retired now, but it was Dr. Victoria Purcell Gates. And we were a really good fit for each other. She would be very open with me to help me understand the process, not just of getting a PhD, but also that process of having the career that I wanted to have. So she really listened. She helped me make sure that I got set up properly. She helped me think through and transition to being a PhD student into an assistant professor. And when I got my job and was an assistant professor, one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of people around me did not have that same kind of academic mentoring experience that I got with Vicki. So when I started talking to even other people that had gotten their degree at my same institution and just getting to know other assistant professors who had gotten their PhDs at a variety of institutions, some of them obviously had great mentoring experiences. A lot of them had mediocre experiences or very poor experiences and sort of felt like they were struggling and floundering a little bit. So that sort of gets me down to this equal access point here. That's really one of the things that you're going to see that I'm striving to do here with this, is to really try to give people access to information so that they can have the careers that they want to have and learn how to navigate academia. So if I want to go forward, what do I need to do here? Okay, why don't you just do it? we're gonna get it. There's two of us. We're gonna figure it out. So I have a website and a YouTube channel, and both of them are called Teaching Academia. And the purpose of this website and this YouTube channel is to really help mostly graduate students, and also it's relevant for beginning assistant professors to navigate higher ed. What kind of career do you want to have? What kind of information do you need, right? How can I make these invisible processes more visible to you so that you can have the kind of career that you want to have? And a lot of stuff, and I'm going to show you some examples of videos and materials that I have in a minute. No, it's okay. Some of these might seem very basic, and some of these might seem like things that people should already know, but actually a lot of people don't know. And I can get feedback on the most basic thing. I recently did a video on what is a temporary advisor. And somebody thanked me for that because they had recently entered graduate school, got a temporary advisor, had no idea what that was, had no idea that the word temporary meant temporary, right? Just helping people understand these different roles. So we can go to thank you. So these are some examples. Really, I couldn't think of good headings, to be honest with you. All of these videos are meant to be supportive, but I really just wanted to flag like the top 3 most popular ones so that you can get a sense of what they are. Like How to Give an Amazing Academic Job Talk has, I think it's over 5,000 views, which isn't a lot in YouTube land, but makes me feel pretty good about myself. So people really want help on that, right? They want help on learning how to write. Anything on academic writing, any kind of secrets, tips, tools that I can give to sort of help demystify the process. And I try to be very explicit, very direct, very to the point, do this, not that kind of a thing. How you make effective presentations. And some of these I bring in other scholars. So I'm constantly looking for other scholars that want to come on the channel, that want to share their experiences, that have a really good idea. I recently connected with Dr. Raul Mora, who is a professor in Columbia, who wants to talk about, I did a series on mystifying the dissertation process. What does the dissertation defense look like? And he said, you know what you really need to do is now you need to talk about when you're finished with your defense, now what do you do to get published? And what are the different ways to communicate your work and get it out there? So we're going to start making a collaborative series around that. So I'm always looking for people that have have different ideas, different views, that want to bring them on, that will help beginning and emerging scholars be successful. All right, we can go to the next one. And so when I think about how I find these topics, ultimately, really what I want to do is break this process down for people. So when I'm on Twitter, I am sharing videos, I am sharing blog posts, I am sharing questions. I'm asking people, what do you want to learn? What's a struggle for you? Where can you use more help and support? And letting them feed me the questions and issues that they have that I can then turn into video series or blog posts. I've been reaching out recently to people that have experiences that are very different from mine to write guest blog posts that we then share on Twitter. So recently we did a series where somebody called the Junior Prof, who wants to remain anonymous, but you can actually find this person. I think it's at the Junior Prof on Twitter. I'm not 100% sure. Shared, her schedule, how she plans. I'm looking for a graduate student right now that also would like to do that. I shared my schedule for the week as an endowed chair. What does that look like? Because it looks very different from the Junior Prof schedule. We had an assistant professor write a post that's shared. She has a blog called Toddler on the Tenure Track. I don't have a toddler, right? So what does your weekly schedule look like? How do you plan when you have a toddler? So we had all these 3 posts of people with different experiences, different backgrounds, different time points, sharing how we plan, manage, and the kinds of things that we have to balance over different points in your career. So really trying to make all of that visible, right? So I'm always looking for people that've got different experiences. If you've got something and you want it shared, I would love to hear from you because I would love to be able to include that. So, we take questions from students, right? I'm always asking students to give me feedback, information, input on how I can provide material that's going to be relevant and useful to them. And then also looking at what are common struggles that, that I see on a daily basis that graduate students typically struggle with that they could need help on. And like I said, some of this, when you've been around for a while, might seem very basic. And I think that sometimes we forget to communicate that to students. But I think it's very relevant and important because when we do that, we break down these walls and then we make things that are invisible more visible. We give more equitable and equal access to the academy for anyone who would like it. So that's what I do on Twitter and YouTube and other places.
Thank you. All right, well, let's stand here for
Yeah.
a second. People
Questions?
have questions. Anything about this one?
What do I think? I
Yeah.
have to read this
Okay.
before we answer it?
So,
I can't read
well,
it.
So this is
Can't see it.
will the university eventually succumb? It's not so much about mentoring specifically, but it's a very interesting question.
Okay.
Will the university eventually succumb to the piecemeal education of variable and untested quality on social media bites? From Heather. Where are you, Heather? Yeah.
Will the university,
Yeah. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about your question?
Yeah, it wasn't, you're right, it wasn't a direct
Yeah, but I think it's a kind of a nice general. Yeah. Is it?
question about all these bits and pieces of education and pseudo-education available on different social media.
Yeah.
And just how, I mean, there was the initial thing I think Jonathan said about the merging of university knowledge and social media in terms of what counts as knowledge. But it's just a sort of sci-fi question. You think the university will, finally sink underneath the pressure of all these little bits and pieces on social media that call themselves education?
yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because there are certainly like a number of people out there, right, that have courses on, right? How do you write a dissertation, right? There's support for finding academic jobs. There's people that have whole companies around this that might provide courses or might provide some kind of one-on-one tutoring or mentoring. I don't know, I don't know to what extent the university would eventually succumb to that, but I think it's important to pay attention to that. I know, recently that I have a graduate student that was working on her academic writing and was trying to find some extra courses because there are extra courses on other online platforms that you can take on anything, right? Like baking, photography, whatever. But they also exist on academic writing and they're fairly cheap. And I said to her, that's fine, but I don't know the quality of these courses. So I said, I can't vouch for what you might be purchasing, and I can't know to what extent it's really going to help you. So there's that too. Yeah.
Can I just follow up and say that, I mean, if people find your stuff, you will be credited to a university.
Right.
You're bona fide. That's quite different from somebody working in their basement. I mean, we actually do study, which we found some guy working in his basement in, I don't know, England or somewhere, where, he had this whole branded presence and everything. We were looking at this branded thing, and it turned out this was just a kid, a teenager working in a basement somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's a very different thing from what you were.
Right, and then it becomes, right, to use my graduate student as an example, right, then how is she supposed to spend that kind of time to sort that out, right? So, yeah, I think it gets really hard.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Leigh. So we have one final opportunity for small group conversation now that we've heard 4 different perspectives on the promise and peril of social media. It's 11:40. We'll come back together in 5 minutes at 11:45 for our panelists to reflect one last time on any of your final questions and to wrap up. So again, just interact. If you want to switch it up this time, that's fine, or talk with the same people. What have you heard? What do you think about what you've just heard? Any other observations on social media and research use or mentorship? All right, everyone, let's pull it together one last time.
Again, if you look at who are the top 10 education researchers cited in the news media, it is
Looks like some really dynamic and animated conversations. I'm so glad that you all had the chance to chat with each other in these different formats. All right, so as a way to wrap up today, I'm just going to give our panelists one last opportunity to share or answer any questions that they would like to answer.
I know.
Vivian also has a brief announcement.
Oh,
Is it?
If any of you are interested in studying the use of research evidence or methods for assessing whether research is being used and how it's getting passed around, like these kind of network methods, we have a monograph. I only have a small set, but I can hand out to you, written by Drew Jitomer. It's fresh off the presses. If you want one and I run out, they're also available free for download on our website, or you can give us your address and we'll send it to you. but I have about 8 here.
Thank you. All right, so I just wanted to highlight a few last comments and questions and give our panelists a chance to say anything else they'd like to say. We got a comment from Lizette. Where are you, Lizette? Oh, yes, thank you. Based on my work and my participants, I think that social media can be a means for liberation. We need to be careful that we do not look at quote-unquote expertise through a deficit lens. And we also need to be cognizant of how and why social media is being used. Who does it privilege? Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that that's great. And I think if, people are interested in studying that as a phenomenon, we do have theoretical perspectives on that, right? Like critical race theory. You can bring that to bear and then actually empirically study the ways in which it plays out, and then hopefully study ways of disrupting that. So we can turn our skill sets as researchers to bear on that as a problem.
Yeah, well, the kinds of social network diagrams that are being used to map Twitter, just even through the Common Core hashtag, or who is citing whom, or the kind of analyses journals who is citing whom, those visualization strategies can be very powerful tools for illuminating that kind of power and capital. Are there any concluding comments from any of the panelists that you'd like to make based on what you heard today?
I would just encourage folks, if you're not on Twitter, to get on Twitter. I actually, I found it very intimidating when I first got on Twitter. And for the most part, when I started on Twitter, I was just like observing and reading for a long time. And I have found it to be a wonderful way of just consuming information. I think sometimes Twitter gets the rap of it's all about like, your latest opinion on X, Y, or Z, which it is. It's a good form of exchange, but I think it's also quite useful as a tool for consuming information. But I would say that when we want to do it more strategically down the line, we can use these comms framework, the knowledge brokerage framework, to really think more carefully about what is our intended goals and what are our intended audiences. And that will help us be more strategic and hopefully more impactful in the ways in which we use social media.
I'll add something. So I just want to give one more plug. If you have any ideas or things that you would like to share, I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Twitter, and then we can move it over to email or whatever. But I am open to featuring, your content, things that you want to share that would help demystify the academic process via a blog post, or if you want to make a YouTube video, and all of that gets promoted and shared and discussed on Twitter. Or if you have graduate students that have questions, issues, things that they would like to see discussed that, sometimes I'm just not aware of, they are more than welcome to reach out to me on Twitter or email or however, and let me know what those are. And content is slowly produced, but I do listen to it. It does get incorporated, and over time it eventually makes its way out. Or we can just have a chat over Twitter about it as well. So,
I just hope that as faculty in particular, we continue to have conversations about how we use Twitter and think about our personal and professional identities, and even if there's even more structure around how we use our Twitter handles and the extent to which they represent our institutions versus our own personal interests, and it being a really useful tool to have intergenerational dialogue and collect individuals who may not physically be in the same space but share a lot of interests and experiences. Follow Burke _TC.
Yeah, I think that what I'd like to say is that this makes the work that we do more important than ever, because if you go to school when the kids are leaving and see how much they're plugged into their phones, and that this really is a calling to us to try to introduce veracity and how do you know that something is real versus something that somebody just shared with you that you can spread on. So the antidote to darkness is lightness, and I think that what we need to do is we need to make people more sophisticated consumers so they're not so readily accepting of things at face value. And I think that that makes the work that we do so important.
Thank you, John. Thank you to all of our panelists today for sparking such a great discussion. Thank you to you all for coming. If the role of social media in education is of interest to you, there is another great session on this topic on Monday at 2:15. Look for that, and just thank you again for coming and taking the time. We hope you have a wonderful AERA. Oh, thanks.